Let's bring in constitutional attorney and former federal prosecutor Katie Cherkasky. Katie, good morning to you. So there is some nuance to this Supreme Court ruling on the Alien Enemies Act that is allowing both sides to claim legal victory here. So tell us more about this ruling and what it means for deportations moving forward.
Well, essentially, the Supreme Court recognized that the president has broad authority to declare whether somebody should be in this country under the Alien Enemies Act. And that's something that the Supreme Court has ruled on the other times that it looked at this act. And what that means really for the people that are removed is that they have one option through a habeas petition to essentially challenge whether they are in fact subject to that act and can bring those individual cases in the district where they're confined, but they cannot come forward as a class and try to claim that President Trump has overstepped his bounds. The Supreme Court's recognized that the president has almost limitless bounds to declare whether something is a danger to our country. It's a national security issue. And that's what essentially this ruling did at this point, allowing these people to move forward individually with habeas petitions to say that they're actually not a member of this gang, for instance.
You said moving forward, and I'm glad you said that because we first need to take a step back. That same judge today, Judge Boasberg, is going to hold a preliminary injunction hearing on whether to hold Trump administration officials in contempt over that plane flight, the original one, to El Salvador. Do you think the Supreme Court decision will have any bearing on Judge Boasberg's decision, his thinking in any way, Katie?
Well, I certainly think that the Supreme Court's decision should have a huge impact on that, because essentially this case should never have been even brought before Judge Boasberg, and he should not have began to rule upon it according to the Supreme Court. It should have only been brought individually as a habeas petition on behalf of individual detainees. So his authority over this case essentially never existed, and I would think that would extend to any sort of orders he purported to issue.
Okay, well, in an entirely separate deportation case, the former Columbia University grad student and anti-Israel protester Mahmoud Khalil will likely make his first public appearance in front of a Louisiana immigration judge today. How significant is this appearance today, and where is this case going moving forward?
Well, that case has been touted as some sort of First Amendment issue, but at the end of the day, it's a matter of whether somebody that's here as a guest on a visa has the right to support a terrorist organization, essentially, and whether that would lead to their revocation of the right to be here. And I certainly think that that's the path that this is headed down. The Secretary of State has very broad discretion to revoke visas for that purpose, and certainly there's been a lot of distraction in terms of his rights and the First Amendment here, but that's not really what this all boils down to. It is essentially a unilateral decision that is subject to very little judicial discretion.
One more for you, Katie. An appeals court has ruled that DOJ can continue to access government information for now. I don't know about you, but in order to root out government fraud, waste, and abuse, it seems to me pretty important to be able to access government data. How important is this precedent going forward for DOJ to carry out its overall mission?
Well, this is incredibly important to allow DOJ to move ahead with accessing this data. Essentially, again, this was more of a preliminary hearing, but the court said that DOJ can access the data in order to do its work, and that there hasn't been any harm that's been spelled out for the court at this point. It's all kind of hypothetical, and that's not something that a court can address. So certainly it seems that these courts are recognizing the power of the president under the Constitution, which is very important, I think, at this point, needless to say.
Yeah. Well, if you're keeping a tally at home, there are three rulings that came down yesterday that the Trump administration is celebrating this morning. Katie, got to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And here we go. A Fox News alert. The Supreme Court giving a major boost to President Trump's border agenda, clearing the way for deportation flights to resume using the Alien and Enemies Act after an Obama-appointed judge tried to block it. Let's bring in the Attorney General for the United States, Pam Bondi. Madam Attorney General, thank you so much for joining the program.
Thank you. Good morning. It's a great day for America, and it's a great day to be a Florida Gator.
Well, yes, it is. More news on that later, Madam Attorney General. But let's talk about what the court did. Essentially, you know, they didn't rule when it comes to the Aliens and Enemy Act. What they said was this was the wrong venue, that the D.C. Circuit Court had no jurisdiction over that. But they also said, listen, if there's due process, then they have to do it through the normal channels, through a habeas writ. So what is the administration reaction to all that the Supreme Court just said yesterday?
Well, Lawrence, this is a landmark victory for the rule of law. And this is what we've been arguing on behalf of President Trump from day one. These are enemies of our state, of our country, and they should be deported. And what the judge ruled was going forward, from this day forward, all those planes that are gone are there. Those people are staying. So there are a lot of reasons why Americans are safer. From this point forward, the hearing will be held, it's a habeas hearing, in the court of confinement, which means in Texas. Yeah. So it will be a much faster hearing. They can't do class actions. It will be a much smoother, simpler hearing, and these people will be deported. Americans are safer, and domestic terrorists, foreign terrorists, you better look out, because we're coming after you. I'd start self-deporting if I were you, because we're going to find you.
So, Madam Attorney General, let's get this on record, because I think it's important for the audience to understand. Going forward, there's no shopping as it relates to immigration anymore. If someone is detained and scheduled for a deportation, they can no longer shop across the country for a judge, a liberal leading judge. And now, all the cases going forward have to go to that Texas judge. Is that correct?
Correct, Lawrence, and that's what was happening. These liberal district judges thought that they could control our entire country's policy, Donald Trump's policy, on keeping America safe. They cannot do it, and this was, again, a landmark ruling for the rule of law yesterday, and it's so important because these flights will now continue. These terrorists, they are foreign terrorists, they are alien enemies to our country, and we will continue to deport them. We are going to keep America safe, and a liberal district judge is not going to stop us. And that's what the Supreme Court ruled yesterday.
So, Madam Attorney General, let's talk about the judge in D.C., Boasberg. There's a hearing scheduled today. Will that happen? I mean, this is essentially over. Will he still try to use some type of power that he has?
There is a hearing scheduled today at 3 p.m. He is not canceling the hearing. He is continuing on with the hearing, but the Supreme Court has spoken loud and clear. He has no jurisdiction. That flight will remain in El Salvador. Those inmates, those violent gang members, those violent alien enemies will remain in El Salvador. He cannot get them back. So his jurisdiction is over. So we'll see what he says today at 3 p.m. But going forward, these terrorists better look out.
Let's talk about this DOJ attorney that you have since put on leave. As I was reviewing the case, I found a lot of the action skeptical, interesting. It seemed like this attorney was arguing for the other side and not for the United States at that moment. At what point did you make the decision to pull him off the case?
Well, we represent the United States of America. That's our client. That's our only client, and all the agencies that fall under the federal government. And any lawyer has an ethical duty to argue on behalf of their client, not against their client. And that's what happened in this case. He has been placed on administrative leave, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think it was the right decision. You're exactly right.
There have to be consequences for your actions. There will be consequences for your actions. You have to ethically argue on behalf of your client, and that wasn't happening in this case.
That's exactly right. So, Madam Attorney General, it looks like Maine is upset, the state of Maine. The president made it very clear that no more men and women's sports. Not going to happen. As a result of that, he took a lot of the funding away since they didn't want to comply. They have since decided that they're going to sue the United States government. You're going to be representing the government. What can you tell us?
Well, we were right to do that. President Trump has the right to determine where the money goes, where federal money goes. And also, Lawrence, on Friday, we got a great win, too, with the Department of Justice. The Supreme Court ruled in our favor on DEI and where this money can go with the Department of Education. So that falls for every agency. We can determine where that money goes, all federal money. Now, back to Maine. Yeah, what's happening there is they're not abiding by what President Trump said. They're allowing men and women's sports. And in the case right now, what we did last night, some breaking news, we pulled all non-essential funding from the Department of Corrections in Maine because they were allowing a man in a woman's prison, a giant 6'1", 245-pound guy who committed a double murder with a knife, stabbed his parents to death and the family dog, and he identified as a woman. So they were letting him be housed in a female prison. No longer. We will pull your funding. We will protect women in prison. We will protect women in sports. We will protect women throughout this country. No more of that.
It's unbelievable that we're still dealing with this issue. It seems like the American people have spoken on this issue, but the resistance campaign continues. Madam Attorney General, thank you so much for joining Fox and Friends this morning.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Jonathan Turley is a constitutional legal professor and a Fox News contributor. He's here with us. Just want to read to you from President Trump's post about this. The Supreme Court has upheld the rule of law in our nation by allowing a president, whoever that may be, to be able to secure our borders and protect our families and our country itself. A great day for justice in America. Justice Sotomayor, she disagreed, though. She said this: the government's conduct in this litigation poses an extraordinary threat to the rule of law. That a majority of this court now rewards the government for its behavior with discretionary, equitable relief is indefensible. We as a nation and a court of law should be better than this. But the majority won, the president taking a little bit of a victory lap there. Well-deserved?
It is well-deserved. It has both legal and political significance here. You know, Judge Boasberg has really sort of sucked the oxygen out of the room on this case for weeks. It turns out he should never have heard the case to begin with. Many of us noted at the outset that this looked like a habeas case, and if so, it belonged in Texas. Judge Boasberg just wouldn't hear of it and kept on, including holding extraordinary sessions on Saturdays and issuing all of these orders. The problem is that the habeas proceedings are not a particularly good avenue for the detainees. You know, they will get due process, but I think in the end, a lot of these individuals are going to feel like they got a perfunctory hearing and a bag of peanuts on their way to their flight. And it's one of those things under the habeas standard. I don't see how they can prevail. So they'll get their day in court. Some of them have already had a day in court, but they'll make sure of that. But I don't see under the habeas standard how many of these individuals, if any, could prevail.
So the Attorney General Pam Bondi was on Fox and Friends just a little while ago. Here's what she said about these federal judges and these nationwide temporary restraining orders. Listen here.
These liberal district judges thought that they could control our entire country's policy, Donald Trump's policy, on keeping America safe. They cannot do it, and this was, again, a landmark ruling for the rule of law. We will continue to deport them. We are going to keep America safe, and a liberal district judge is not going to stop us.
So this brings up a number of different issues. First of all is this idea of district judges issuing nationwide temporary restraining orders. Even Justice Elena Kagan questions that. Then there's this idea about judge shopping in favorable districts, like the District of Columbia. And then there's the overarching idea of whether or not these district judges even have any kind of jurisdiction over national security concerns. What do you think about all that?
That's right. And the majority in this case actually gave a sort of backhand to these judges and these challengers. They said, look, this should always have been brought in Texas. It was very clear to many that they were form shopping. They were looking for a favorable judge. They found a judge in Judge Boasberg who was willing to give them a great deal, but he should never have heard this case. On the national injunctions, that's a very serious matter, as you've noted. Even liberal justices have complained. You can't run a government like this. You can't have endless sort of Lilliputian attacks of over 600 judges holding up the business of the government. Congress is moving on that. But also the Supreme Court's been clear for years. A majority on the Supreme Court has been stating in oral arguments particularly, this has got to stop. It's just that these judges are not listening.
What is the significance of the order saying that the District Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C. is not the proper venue for this?
Well, I think that is part of this this slapback on form shopping, that this should have been clear, in my view, to Judge Boasberg. I have not joined in a lot of the calls for impeachment. I think that would be a huge mistake, or the attacks on the judge himself. He had a good faith argument. I thought he was wrong, and the system has worked, and he has now been taken off the case. Now, he's going to have a hearing this afternoon, which is going to be rather odd. It's like showing up at a party and all the guests are going to the house next door. So I'm not too sure how long that hearing's going to be. But I think that it was a mistake of his to accept that. Obviously, the Supreme Court did as well. Also, the dissent is a little bit odd here with these four justices, particularly Justice Barrett. I wrote on my blog this morning, I still don't quite know why Barrett joined the dissent. She only joined a very small part of it. Part of that was saying they get due process rights, but the majority said that. So I'm still rather confused at why Justice Barrett dissented.
I'm sure Donald Trump is confused as well.
Good point.
Professor, thanks so much. The DOJ, we should say, has petitioned Boasberg to dismiss the case, so we'll see what happens at that hearing this afternoon. Good to see you, Professor. Thanks.
The U.S. Supreme Court has handed the Trump administration a major victory. It ruled Trump is allowed to use a wartime authority to deport alleged Venezuelan gang members. Now, all of this is after Washington, D.C. Circuit District Judge James Boasberg tried to block the president. The court also ruled the appropriate venue for these kinds of proceedings would be in Texas or wherever the plaintiffs are being held. As a result, then Judge Boasberg had to cancel his D.C. planned hearing on the case today. And the president posted the U.S. Supreme Court has upheld the rule of law in our nation by allowing a president, whoever that be, to be able to secure our borders and protect our families and our country itself. A great day for justice in America. Trump's administration is also taking a victory lap. Watch.
A monumental, colossal victory for the rule of law.
A massive victory for law and order and for our constitutional republic and the sovereignty of the United States of America.
A landmark victory for the rule of law. And this is what we've been arguing on behalf of President Trump from day one. These are enemies of our state, of our country, and they should be deported.
Republican Congressman Chip Roy of the great state of Texas, member of the Judiciary, Budget, and Rules Committees. Welcome. Great to have you in focus. First of all, I just want to get your reaction to a couple of victories, really, for the administration.
Well, first of all, this important ruling from the Supreme Court reset the table with respect to the activism, the blatant activism by Boasberg. Now, let's keep in mind what the court said. The court said that, look, he had no business doing this from the District of Columbia. This is a flight that was originating in Texas to remove people that are being rightfully removed because they're a danger to our country. Now, pause for a second. How do I know that they're a danger to our country, Harris? 47 people affiliated with Tren de Aragua were just caught literally in Dripping Springs, Texas, not far from where I live. This is a real issue throughout Texas because of the absolute devastation that the Biden administration wreaked upon the United States and its people. So now President Trump is doing the right thing to remove these dangerous gang members. And this activist judge inserted himself. Now, the good news is the Supreme Court said, no, you don't get to do that. This should have been done in Texas, and there's a process for doing this, and that the law is good law. My concern is that Amy Coney Barrett didn't follow the majority. So there was one that voted the wrong way. My other concern is that they said there needs to be a reasonable time for these folks to be able to go appeal their case, which means it's going to go back to habeas cases, which means there's going to be a churn on these cases. So it's good news, but it's not something that we should take to the bank without changing. That's why, as the chairman of the Constitution Subcommittee, we had a hearing about legislation that we need to move through the House to limit some of the abuses that are taking place with these nationwide injunctions by these rogue judges.
And Congressman, you and I have had this conversation before about the first law breaking was coming across the border illegally. And then other acts potentially, and maybe even the previous, gangster membership for some of these people. My question is, if you're going to get habeas corpus, if you're going to have the ability to appeal, what exactly are you appealing? Because you came here illegally. You've already broken the law.
Well, that is my view, and I think we should take that view as a country. I want to be very clear. The President of the United States is completely correct, and he's following his role as Commander-in-Chief to defend the United States of America, to then act and remove these dangerous actors. Remember, Jocelyn Nungaray died last summer at the hands of Tren de Aragua. Cindy Romero was testifying in my committee of all the dangers that she was exposed to in the apartment complexes in Aurora, Colorado. This is real, and as I said, in my backyard, literally in Dripping Springs, Texas, just last week, 47 people, including 9 children, by the way, in what we believe was a stash house. This is real, and the president deserves great latitude to remove these individuals. What will happen is leftist groups, frankly, often funded because Congress is stupid and funds money to these, NGOs, and they use that to then fund this litigation. They will take these cases to court, and they'll say, oh, no, they were rightfully released into the United States, and they deserve their day in court to prove that, in fact, the paroles and the asylum cases that the Biden administration abused to release these dangerous criminals on our streets is something that should prevent them from being removed. But the president is correct to remove these dangerous folks under his powers as commander-in-chief.
Rightfully, you can let them go across the country, but they broke in to get in.
Correct.
Wow. Well, you just mentioned those rogue judges. Let's go deeper on that. The House is actually set to vote on the No Rogue Ruling Act today, and it aims to limit the power of so-called radical district judges and restrict them from issuing nationwide injunctions against executive orders. In fewer than 3 months, judges have already blocked Trump's order 17 times. That's more than the injunctions issued during the terms of his recent predecessors. Here's Republican Congressman Jeff Van Drew of New Jersey.
That has gotten to the point of they believe they're the legislators, they believe they're the executive branch, they believe they're judicial branch, and some of them have extremely partisan messages to deliver, and that's not what their job is. Be the judicial branch, do what you're supposed to do.
So the No Rogue Ruling Act, what will it accomplish?
Yeah, well, we will vote on that today, along with the SAVE Act, which was my bill to guarantee that only citizens vote in American elections. These are 2 important pieces of legislation.
Yes.
This bill would stop these nationwide injunctions by saying that they should only apply to the parties before the judge. But then it allows, in the instance where there's a case where you have 2 attorneys general in different states that want to appeal and go up to a 3-judge panel, they can say, wait, this ought to be a nationwide injunction, and then it would go immediately to the Supreme Court. This would stop a single judge from being able to unilaterally make law effectively by stopping action by issuing an injunction or a TRO, but would force it through a process that makes more sense. It is a good bill. We passed it out of the Judiciary Committee. I hope we will move it on the floor this week and send it over to the Senate, but then we'll look for all of the obstruction that we'll normally get out of Chuck Schumer and the Democrats. But our job is to do our work in the House and send it to the Senate. We think this is an important move to preserve the ability to go to court, but not allow a single judge like Boasberg, who was just slapped down by the Supreme Court for getting out of his lane. We don't want to have that happen in the future, and this legislation would try to prevent that.
You know, in normal circumstances, you would have a situation where other district and circuit court judges would look at that and say, well, if they're going to slap him down, why even start the game? But this is not normal. They want to slow down the president of the United States, even if they can't stop him. Your last quick word.
Well, this is an emergency, and Stephen Miller's been dead on point on this. The commander-in-chief has the ability and the power to defend our country. We have radical, dangerous, illegal people in the United States affiliated with dangerous gangs, cartels, moving drugs, killing Americans. They need to be removed. And frankly, after the millions of people released in the United States, the president needs deference to do that, and we ought to move as Congress to back him up on that.
Yeah, you would think that we as Americans could all agree on kicking the worst out first. Congressman, great to see you always. Thank you.
God bless you, Harris.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.